Hello, I thought I'd just do a little video on my fond memories of Matrox's probably consumer heyday from, what was it, mid to late 90s through probably the following 10 years really, with the original Mystique, Millenniums, the G series, the Parhelia, up to where they are currently in current day. So I've got quite fond memories of Matrox from late 90s, around about 2000 or so, when they were big in the consumer world. They were top of their game. They were top of the graphics card market at one point briefly, before ATI and Nvidia really got their game together. I used to be quite active on one of the Matrox forums, the MERC, the Matrox Users Resource Centre, where there was a few of us were picked up by Matrox to do some beta testing for them. That was for the G400 and the Parhelia, around about those age cards. So I thought I'd start here with the way it all started with me, the Matrox Mystique PCI here. You can see it's a 1064 chipset. This was really one of the first proper graphics cards that tried doing 3D. Generally, you had Windows accelerators for Windows 95. It started in 3.1. There were lots of cards around then. The Millennium had been out for a while, and that was well known as being a very high performance card in 2D, and it had some very basic 3D bits, and this was kind of their entry into the consumer 3D world. This was a continuation of Matrox, where they were known to have the best image quality. This wasn't quite the Millennium, but there was a high quality RAM DAC. It beat every other card out there. It was like the standard. When you plugged into a CRT screen, there was no LCDs really. The sharpest picture you would get would be off a Matrox. The 2D performance of this was market leading. This and the Millennium will beat things like the S3 Verge or the ATI Max 64s of the time. The 3D features, there's Matrox, unusually for them, decided performance over 3D quality. So it had a few key features missing. I think bilinear filtering or fogging maybe. That said, this came with, in the retail box, it came with a few games such as MechWarrior 2, Destruction Derby, and the add-ons which improved those games were quite impressive. I'm trying to capture the MechWarrior 2 improvements, which has proved very difficult. The output seems to be not quite 640 by 480 or not quite a normal refresh rate. Any LCD screen I plugged it into, or TV, it has trouble syncing. You get an out of range or various errors. I did manage to get a few seconds worth before my old HP LCD shut down, which you can see here.
Planet coal mine. Ambient temperature 34.65 degrees. Local time is 01:34:16 GST. All systems nominal.
So this was outperforming the 3D early 3D cards of the day, like the ATI Rage and the S3 Verge, and got a lot of people interested in 3D PC gaming. And really, it was all in consoles at the time. It's also had features you could plug in some extra RAM here. This has got 2 meg. You could get, I believe, a 4 meg version, potentially even an 8 meg version. You've got the feature connector here for the Rainbow Runner, which is broke out into a multitude of cables for TV capture and TV playback. Next followed was the G series name, when the name starts there, the G200. This was my first proper AGP card, I believe. I remember experimenting with some, I think it was SIS 6326 or some ATI Max cards of the day, or S3 Verge. But this was a truly AGP graphics chipset, so it could use system RAM for things that couldn't fit on board, textures and things. So this had 8 meg standard. You could expand it to 16. Before this, actually, Matrox did notice that you had the ATI video and rendition cards. 3D was obviously becoming popular. They did make a stopgap before this, which was the Power VR based M3D, which is a graphics card with no output. It's, I believe, used some sort of overlay to get the 3D picture out to you on your existing graphics card. That was quite a decent card. It had limited following in software, and games that took advantage of it did look impressive. The M3D is pretty expensive on eBay these days. I do look out for one, but I can't see me getting one anytime soon. So again, this came out in 1998. Again, there was a Millennium and Mystique versions. They carried their naming standards on, where the Millennium was the highest specs one that had SG RAM, where the Mystique had SD RAM. This is a Millennium. You can just see there, Mil A 8 meg card. It's 128-bit core processor, outside of memory. They use dual 64-bit interfaces. Matrox reckoned they could get better performance having that than one single 128-bit. One of the great features of this was it had full 32-bit colour rendering. So the other cards of the day, like 3DFX and things like that, were 16-bit, and the image quality of this was, again, market leading. They called their 32-bit colour rendering the Vibrant Colour Quality, or VCQ. The 3D rendering of this was a bit behind a Voodoo 2, a single Voodoo 2 that is, and it was definitely slower than the rivals such as the NVIDIA Reaver TNT or the S3 Savage 3D. That's in DirectX. In OpenGL, this was the beginnings of Matrox's nightmare with OpenGL. I'm not sure they ever got proper OpenGL drivers working available for this card. They released a DirectX wrapper, which converted the OpenGL commands into DirectX commands with quite a big overhead. It worked. You could play your GL Quake and similar, but it was just messy, and it took them a long time to get over this. The 2D side, just like the cards previous to it, the image quality is second to none. It's the sharpest picture you'd get on your CRT in the days, and amazingly, you still see the G200 chipset on integrated graphics on servers. I've seen it a lot recently. Well, not that recently, but I've seen it a lot over even the last few years. Obviously the chipset is a very reliable and a decent choice for OEMs to use. This is the G400. Came out in 1999. This was the first card that Matrox sent to me as part of the beta testing. This is a G400 standard. They did a G400 Max version, which I'll come on to shortly. So Matrox realised that the G200 was pretty good, but could be better. So they pretty much doubled everything to make the G400. Internally, the memory was 256 bits. The memory capacity was 16 meg or 32 meg versions. The 3D image quality, again, they had the 32 bits rendering. In fact, it's always rendered internally in 32 bit. They called it VCQ2. It also had a feature called EMBM, or Environment Mapped Bump Mapping, which was a technique. They licensed it from BitBoys, which was then bought out by ATI, I believe. It gave surfaces a much more realistic texture. Rather impressive, but a really limited following. They dropped the Mystique versus Millennium naming scheme they had for years. Instead, they just had normal and the Max version. The Max had a higher clock speed and a higher speed memory, 200 MHz versus 166. I believe the G400 Max actually had the highest memory bandwidth of any graphics card at the time. So this was a true AGP 4 times bus as well. This, for a time, was pretty much the best you could get, which is going to be quite a emotive thing to say. I think there'll be lots of people who are massive TNT2 fans or the Voodoo 3s. Or even, was anyone a fan of the A2O Rage 128s? This held its own, no problem at all. And I'll say in DirectX again, the OpenGL nightmare lived on. When it first came out, they just had the DirectX wrapper. It's the same as the G200, it just converted commands into DirectX. Wasn't perfect, it kind of worked. And then they released a thing called Turbo GL, which was a individual per game or application OpenGL driver. It was just extremely messy. But it did work generally. This also had the Rainbow Runner similar add-on, which also was on a G200, and the earlier cards which could do TV capture and TV output. It was called the Marvel for this card. That also left a sour taste in many people's mouths because they never got it working on Windows 2000 officially. Someone did manage to get some drivers to work, one of the enthusiasts on the forums, but it was never supported by Matrox, and so it's kind of died with Windows 98 or ME. It's a bit of a shame, really. One of the best features of this card was the dual outputs. So this brought dual screen desktops to the masses, which we take advantage of today, and we take it completely for granted. This let you do things like independent desktops, stretched desktops. You had a DVD Max, I think they called it, mode, which let you have your normal desktop on one, you play a video such as a DVD, and it will come out full screen on the other one. And the other output could go to a TV or a monitor. This was a Direct 3D version 6 graphics card. It had no hardware TNL, which is the transform and lighting. So that put a large strain on the processor to get the same features as some other competing cards could do in hardware for the time. That was a great card. Very fond memories of using this for many years. I'm just seeing what the serial number is. 336. So that's a relatively early card. Next is the Parhelia 512, as it's called. 512 came because it had a 512-bit memory bus. They called it a ring bus. This was meant to be the best graphics card ever of any competing manufacturer of the time, and it just wasn't. This was the end of Matrox in a consumer market. I'll go into a few more details why, but let's talk about some of the good things. So it's a 128 meg card. There was also a 256 meg version. So it continued the Matrox history of having great picture quality, and this was definitely no exception. It had some features on it which were standout, amazing compared to other cards of the time. It could do, its biggest thing was anti-aliasing. 16 times fragment anti-aliasing it was called. It could also do text anti-aliasing in hardware. There was a lovely demo of the Coral Reef, as it was called. I'll show you a bit of that. So also it had 10-bit colour. They called it Giga Colour. So obviously you now got the digital output, so you start getting the higher quality LCD screens. But yes, it could do 10-bit colour rendering. For analog, it had a 400 megahertz round ax, and it was just the best you could get again for image quality. There was you never saw any shadowing on your screen. There was you never saw, like on your CRT, any shadowing in Windows. You could whack up the resolution up to as high as you want. It would go high and your screens would cope. And yeah, it was a lovely image to view. So this brought out, it continued on from Matrox, why stop on two outputs on the G400. This could do 3 outputs. They called it triple head or surround gaming. I fondly remember having a large 21-inch screen in the middle and then 2 17-inch CRTs next to it, and playing flight sims and car racing games, things like that. It was just amazing having the peripheral view. It was like being in an arcade. So it was an expensive card. Came out around about $400 US. It also came out a bit late, if I remember rightly. This was also a beta card here I'm holding, the serial number 1909. It's handwritten, so it shows it's relatively early. Compared to others of the day, NVIDIA, their GeForce 4 range, GeForce 3 and Radeon 8500, they're all as good as, if not faster than this, which is a real shame. The memory bandwidth was great, but the main clock was only 220 megahertz, and it had some real weird design flaws. The high memory bandwidth helped, but it rendered things that you didn't need to render. So stuff you couldn't see, when you got some things in front of things, it rendered all the way back. It was poor in determining what needed to be rendered from what you could see and what didn't. And then after release, Matrox acknowledged that the vertex shaders were not shader model 2 capable, and so this was stuck forever as a DirectX 8.1 card, when it was initially advertised as a DirectX 9 card. But because of that, this was overshadowed by newer cards coming out, the GeForce 4, and it was just abandoned by everyone. It was expensive, might look pretty, but wasn't that quick. So it became a kind of a niche product, and NVIDIA and ATI then just took over. Bit of a shame, really. There were a couple of half generations which came out after the G400. There was a G450 and a G550. These are 2 550s here, an AGP and a PCI Express. Quite interesting PCI Express one. It was I believe the first ever PCI Express, certainly a PCI Express version ×1 graphics card. It had this Texas Instruments bridge between the AGP internally and the PCI Express. The G450s, which I don't have one here, but all looked quite similar to these was a die shrunk G400, and that was about it. It was a cost-cutting exercise, and it became massively popular in the OEM world. And it was used by HP Compact for many, many years. And I wouldn't be surprised if you come across them still now. The G550 was also a bit of a die shrink. I think it was. They tried improving a few things, made a bit of a mess of it. They did introduce hardware TNL, but they halved the memory bandwidth. But then they improved the memory to use DDR, but it was just a bit of a mishmash. So it was around for years though. So you can see this is copyright 2001, this is copyright 2005 for the same chipset, just slightly different revisions. This has got a breakout cable, where this has got the actual standard VGA and DVI connectors. And they also, that had the hardware TNL, they used that in this thing called head casting, which is a bit of a joke, and I'm sure Matrox regretted ever releasing it. It was some sort of, you could do video conferencing, but it wasn't a video of you, it was a 3D animated version of you. It was pretty rubbish, never really developed, and I don't know anyone who ever used it. I've got a couple of newer cards here. It's 2005, 2006, 2007, something like that. Can't actually see a date on this one. This is a QID low profile 128 meg, and this is the M9140 low profile 512 meg. So these became what Matrox ended up doing after the failure of the Parhelia. The Parhelion 2 never came out. They gave up on 3D and went down the road of the best image quality you can get, extremely stable, and multi-screens. So I know in where I worked at the time, in the finance industry, these are very popular because you can have 4 screens. This was slightly before the days of common widescreen, like 720p and 1080p, and so it only went up to like 1600 by 1200. But to have 4 screens of information, where you can do the fancy things like the pixel overlap and stuff, so it was perfect for, say, financial information, advertising boards, train stations and airports, all the digital signage. Very popular in that. This, I say, 128 meg card. This was then superseded by this range here, these 9000 range. Passive, low profile, so it fits in all your standard business desktops. This could do 4 full HD screens. It still had the basic 3D capabilities that were hung over from previous generations. You can just run 3D Marco 6 on this. It's not a very pretty sight. You'd be better off running it on your built-in graphics card and your motherboard. And after this, they just kept on doing this, but more and more improvements. So you can get 8 output graphics cards, 8 output screens now. The latest ones will do multiple 4K screens. They still use the same PowerDesk software they've used for forever. Tried and tested. People who know it, they like it. The very latest cards, I'm pretty sure they're now using AMD chipsets. I don't know the exact one, to be honest. I've not looked at the more recent cards in a fair few years. So there's kind of my roundup of my favourite years of PC, playing around with PCs, when they were, I said back when they were interesting. The graphics cards year on year were having leaps and bounds in technology. Great competition between the big players, the Nvidias and the ATIs, as it was then, and Matrox was certainly in the mix there. There's also the S3, I say SIS even had one, and then you had all the Intel various onboard stuff, which people didn't tend to use. And of course 3DFX and the other add-on graphics cards. I was never a huge fan of 3DFX. I didn't like the pass-through where you went out from one graphics card back into another graphics card and out to your monitor, because there was a definite degradation in quality. But 3DFX were the market leaders in 3D gaming at the time. You couldn't beat the performance that they were doing. Lots of innovation on these things. The dual screen especially was a big deal, and you take for granted image quality now. Any old PC graphics card you'll stick into any screen, it will be perfect. But back in the day, you needed a lovely VGA analog output to go to your CRT to get the best image quality you could. So I hope you enjoyed that little roundup. Any comments, please leave them below.